Hey, friends. Hope all's well. I'm Josh Stevens. I'm the worship leader here at Keith Memorial United Methodist Church.
And I'm Mark Reedy, the associate pastor here at Keith.
I had Keith to clarify. And so it's a snow day. The roads are okay, thanks be to God, but our parking lot is a mess. And so I think it was a great call, a safe call for us to decide not to have church. But that being said, we thought we'd try something different. Mark, elaborate a little bit on what we're doing here.
Okay, so we're doing a sort of a podcast, two guys talking about a subject to really mine it for all that it's worth. It's something I've been interested in for a while, at least in being able to further process a sermon. And I just get so much whenever I hear two people talking about something rather than a monologue. I think a dialogue is how I learn best. And so hopefully anybody listening to this, it might get them thinking a little bit more than if they had just heard a monologue. Obviously, it doesn't take place of a Sunday morning service, and this kind of thing's probably not going to happen on a Sunday morning. But it's interesting, and like you were saying earlier before we started recording, it is like a free pass in football.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like D-line jumped off sides, throw the ball.
Throw the ball.
Throw the ball.
So that's what we're doing today, doing a little creative, out-of-the-box thinking, trying out something new. Let us know what y'all think.
Absolutely. All that being said, is last week I was not here. Just to bring it up really quickly, my mother-in-law passed away. We were in Honduras with my wife's family, and please continue to pray for us. It's a tremendous, enormous loss for us, and I digress. But that being said, I wasn't here, but I know we're kicking off a sermon series about sin, and in particular the seven deadly sins. And truly, I am interested, Mark, if you could elaborate a little bit on what y'all talked about last week, so I can be halfway in the know.
Sure. So last week was, there's so many things that we can talk about when we're going to start talking about sin, and I only get to talk about one of them. And last week, what I decided to go with was, what is our starting point whenever it comes to sin? What should motivate us to root out the sin in our lives? And the way that I framed it last week is, we're either going to be motivated by fear or we're going to be motivated by love. And unfortunately, whenever we're motivated by fear, we end up doing a lot of harm to ourselves or to people around us. And we end up not having the fullest relationship with God that we could have. So what I mean by that is, if your motivation for looking at the sin in your life is because you're afraid of God, there's a good chance you're going to lie to yourself about the sin that's there, because you really, really, really want to have no sin in your life, right? And also, if you're afraid of God, you're not going to be close to God. We don't want to go and get close to someone that we're afraid of. And if God's the one that teaches us what the sin is in our life, then our best chance at really understanding sin and what we need to stop doing, how we need to stop thinking to do a better way, right? To live a better way, we need to be close to God, not far from God. And so that means loving God, seeking God, desiring God. So kind of an idea for us to think about is, am I going to do a better job of living sin-free or understanding the sin that's in my life if I'm next to Jesus or if I'm far from Jesus? Anyways, that is also online, where we talk about the dangers of living with God in a fearful way, where we're primarily motivated in that relationship by our fear of God versus our love of God. You can go back and check that out from last week. But I do think that if we are in love with Jesus, we should be rooting out sin in our lives, and we'll do the best possible job of getting it done. Does that make sense?
Indeed. All fair points as well. So that being said, so that's the thing. All right, there's our premise, and then now we're talking about the seven deadly sins. This week we were going to be talking about one of them, right, in particular. But that being said, the seven deadly sins, what are they? Where did they come from? And why should we care? And especially, now, that being said, that's the framework that we're working from. But I think, in particular, if you stumble across this and you're not even a person of faith at all, there's still a lot of wisdom in avoiding these seven things. There's a lot of intelligence in just like acknowledging these things are not good. And so, tell us a little bit about where they're from, their origin, all that good stuff.
Sure. So first, let's say what the 7 are. We've got pride, envy, wrath, and then I put those in a category of their own, by the way. And then you've got the next 4, which are gluttony, greed, sloth, and lust. So the first 3, I think, are in a category of of being about. They have to do with being judgmental. Okay, pride, envy, wrath. These are all things that have to do with being judgmental.
In what way? How is pride judgmental?
Okay, so pride has to do with I'm judging myself, usually in comparison with someone else. So I'm talking about a judgment that involves comparison. Okay?
Okay. I'm
So
with you.
I'm comparing myself to someone else and I'm better. You know, I deserve to be king. You know, they don't. Envy is I'm looking at you and I think you have things that you don't deserve, good things in your life. I wish I had them.
I
Think
still
that,
deserve to be
yeah,
king. Yeah.
I'm judging that I need them more than you do, or that I deserve them more than you do. And then, of course, wrath is it's anger, but it's about I look at you, and I think that you deserve destruction. That's
Correct. I
what
see.
wrath is.
That's
So now it's a
very interesting.
judgment.
It's a judgment that
Yeah.
you deserve whatever bad
Yeah,
I can
exactly.
bring, or
Exactly.
that's
Envy
that's
is about
interesting.
like, hey, I'm hoping that you start losing the good things that you have because I wish I had them, you know, and if I was the one in charge, I never would have gave them to you. And then pride, you know, back at it, that one is about like I should be the one that has all the good things, you know, and I'm looking down on everybody else. I just think that mine is the way that things should go. I should have the right to decide things. I'm putting myself in a very lofty position.
That's
So
interesting.
judging myself, judging others.
I had not thought of it like that before.
Well, then the other 4, so you have gluttony, greed, sloth, and lust. Those have to do with a mismanagement of our appetites. So every one of those things, right? So gluttony is about like food and drink.
Right.
You know, we have to have food and drink. It's normal.
You could
Gluttony,
overdo it.
you can overdo it, and it can become about like the acquisition of more. It's taking more than is mine to take. That's really what it is. It's taking more than is mine to take. Today, in this moment, when I'm sitting down at the table, you got greed, sloth, and lust. I mean, lust is about like so. Sex is a very normal, natural thing, but lust is whenever it's like
You could overdo
that's
it.
not mine to take.
Indeed.
You know, it's about it's a mismanagement of my appetite. I'm going to go far beyond what was set out for me. Same for a sloth is about like, you know, we say laziness, but I think of sloth more as like convenience, you know, seeking convenience and comfort. And so I should have rest. I should have convenience. I should have comfort. But where sloth is a problem is whenever I'm taking more of that appetite than I should. So, and an appetite, by the way, before we go on to greed, I mean, so greed is about money, right? It's about money and things. But an appetite is not bad to have, but it's also never fully satisfied.
Yeah.
You know, you'll eat today, you're going to have to eat again in 4 or 5 hours, you know? There's never going to be, these appetites, there's never going to be enough that I'm not hungry again, or that I'm not going to want another thing again, you know? Or that I'm not going to need to rest again, or have, you know, I'm not going to seek convenience or comfort in my life again. These things should be seen as appetites. And again, I mean, like, so whenever we get into, I think a question you asked earlier was like, why should we care? And we'll come back to where they come from. Let's go there now, and then we'll go to why should we care. But where did they come from? There's this 4th century, which is the 300s, okay? A Christian monk named Evagrius, and he was a monk. He devoted his life to prayer and living in the way of Christ. And he was the first one to get the 7 down. Of course, he had 8, not 7. And he had our 7 that we know today, but the 8th one was sadness, which...
That's fair.
Yeah, that's fair, isn't it? I guess, I don't know. I don't actually know the story of why and how sadness got rooted out. But we've got the 7. And his thing was like and as this developed, so let's also pay attention for a second that the seven deadly sins, it's not like they came out in the 1800s.
Sure.
This is something that's been around for, it just misses the first couple 300 years, of Christianity. And people want to know, well, the seven deadly, are they in the Bible? Well, yes, they are in the Bible, but there's no verse that I can point at that's like, and it lists the seven,
Right.
They're all over the place. I mean, and for instance, the one that we're going to be talking about today, pride, that's all over the Old Testament and it's all over the New Testament. But this guy Evagrius was like, there's something really particularly bad and dangerous about certain sins. And a way for us to think about it is, and they've been called this, not just by him. I think, I want to say it's Gregory the Great. I could be off on that one. Called them the 7 leaders of 7 armies. 7 leaders of 7 armies. The idea being that, like, okay, so why is murder not one of the 7 deadly sins? It's one of the 10 commandments, right? Why is it not one of the 7 deadly sins? Well, because murder's not the leader of the army. It's in the army, okay? The leader of the army is wrath. You see? And so, and if you look at like Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he's going to say, you've heard that it was said that whoever, commits murder, that's terrible. And I know I just botched it, but you can go and look at it yourself. It's in like Matthew 5-7. Go read the Sermon on the Mount. But Jesus goes on to say that, I tell you, anyone who's angry with his brother or sister is liable of the same judgment.
Because it's the leader versus
It's the
army
leader
thing.
versus the army. Jesus is constantly going at like, let's get to the root of sin.
root.
And so like, if we think about like, I play chess. I like chess. I'm not great at chess, but the least dangerous piece on the board is really the person's king, But the whole goal of chess is like, let's attack the king, get the king where we've cornered it, we've captured it, right? There's a lot of other more dangerous pieces, but the game's over. Whenever I can get your king, I've stopped it. I don't have to worry about any other piece. So it's kind of like that with like murder and wrath. Get to wrath and you don't have to worry about murder.
Right.
So get the and for like, the garden example, you got to get the root of a weed when you pull it. You can't just pull the leaves.
Well, and to the point talking about root, something that made me think about with your classification about they're either judgment or a mismanagement of appetite. Something that it made me think about immediately was the root nature of humans. That about how, and what I was thinking about in particular, my daughter, right? My kid, she's full-blown toddler, right? She's 18 months old. And as she is full-blown toddler, you're able to see these things very clearly in her, that there are 2 main motivating factors. Number 1 is anything she wants, therefore an appetite. And then number 2, her judgment, for lack of better terms, about, no, I want that, or I'm very mad I don't have that, or you're going to give me that. And then there's all the things that I want. And so to say that, to talk about how Jesus goes at the root of things or whatever, I think there's incredible wisdom there, that these are at the core root of humans. These things, and in particular, when we talk about the 7 sins, the way that they could be broke down into those 2 groups that you had, that there's, because I see it in my kid, and that's the most basic level it could be at.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
And I feel like so for me, the Sermon on the Mount is really important. Again, Matthew 5-7, go read it. But in that sermon, we can see where Jesus, a central point of the sermon is don't judge.
Yeah.
And from judgment comes pride, envy, and wrath. And then another piece of the sermon is don't worry about your life, what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat. Isn't your life more than that? And he's talking about those appetites. Don't live for your appetites. when we live for our appetites, we're going to get in a bad place. And then also another really good point to bring up when we talk about the seven deadly sins is, and this comes from a book, a Will Willimon book that I'm reading. He says that if you look at the seven and they're present in a young person, they're not that bad. You know, you see a kid out on the basketball court, full of pride in what he's doing, and it's like, okay, he's kind of a punk, but look how great it's making him at basketball. It's not that bad. It's understandable, you know. Or when you see a kid and obviously got a lot of lust going on, you know, it's like, that's understandable. You can't really look at it in a young person and see it for how awful it really is. Look at that same thing and imagine it now in a 70-year-old person. And now you start to see, there's a lot of consequences to that cardinal sin, that capital sin, that deadly sin being present in someone's life for a long period of time. I mean, like, you would be repulsed by a 45-year-old's man's lust far more than you would by like a 13-year-old boy.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, and that's where we really need to get with this is like, what happens whenever that leader of that army is just present in your life for decades? Then you'll get it, you know? You'll see at that point how bad it really was all along.
So that being said, that's very interesting to think about because it's painfully true. What does pride look like in a 50-year-old?
Well, okay, so the first thing that I think of here, I'm a dad, okay? And I'm just going to the stereotypical 50-year-old dad from like, I don't know, rewind the clock a few decades. So full of pride that they can't tell their children that they love them. They can't look at their kids and be vulnerable and be like, I really love this about you. You know, I see that I've made these sorts of mistakes in my life, and I'm so impressed with how you handle those same things. Okay? And maybe some of us can relate to that a little bit. Like whenever we've noticed like our parents haven't been able to really see us for who we are and praise us. But pride in a 50-year-old, when it's been there for a long time, you're going to see someone who cannot be vulnerable, who cannot encourage other people, right? And we have a mandate in Scripture, by the way, as the church, to encourage one another in the name of Christ. But someone who's so full of pride can't lift up someone else because they can only see themselves. They can only put forth energy and effort to build up themselves, you know? So a prideful person usually only sees the mistakes. They only see what's wrong. They criticize, you know? And of course, I mean, there's other aspects of it, but that was where my mind immediately went to when you asked that question. You can't get close to a prideful person.
And then it just ultimately leads because you can't get close to them. It ultimately leads to one's own isolation.
Yeah.
Which is no way to be.
Yeah.
No way to exist.
Yeah, and the longer that like pride sits there, I mean, it's not like you're only gonna have pride. No one's gonna be like, oh, I only have one of the 7 deadly sins present in my life. You might have one worse than another. But you got to root out that one, and then you'll see the presence of the others. And that's actually something that I've thought about with the 7 deadly sins for a while. Like I like to do a performance review, just like you would at work, on myself. And about every every half a year, I kind of look at the 7 deadly sins in my life, and I'm like, where am I at on this? Am I struggling more with one of these than another one? And I've found where when I put a lot of attention into what I think is the worst one in my life, and I start like, oh, okay, and I'm working on that, now I can see how bad the other ones were in my life too. But sometimes the presence of one can dominate so much that we don't think we have an issue with the other 6.
Right.
You know? So.
Well, I know for me, and with talking about pride, I have a weird relationship with pride. I think, because it ultimately leads to the question of, is it always bad?
Mm.
Because I don't, I, one second, guys. Oh, we're good. The computer just kind of did a weird thing. We're good. But pride, is it always bad? And the reason is because I don't think I'm right about this. I don't think I'm right. It's
Mm-hmm.
just being honest about it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
In my mind, it seems that there exists a good kind of pride and a bad kind of pride.
Yeah.
There's a type of balance to be
Yeah.
achieved and found. And I've run into it quite a bit, where it's a thing of I have to think about, well, is this the good pride or the bad pride you're dealing with
Right.
right here? And I mean that because I'm not being dramatic. I deal with it a lot,
Yeah.
truly a lot, because I kind of have, for lack of better terms, I kind of have a perfectionist streak
Mm.
in me, and it's not like that's not like a good or a pat on the back. It's often crippling. That I'll not do something unless it can be perfect, or I'll not, and then I'll end up thinking, is this pride in that I'm too proud for it to just be done rather than perfect? Or is it good that I'm so prideful that I want something to be so good? If
Mm.
that, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, that being said, without further digressing down that rabbit hole where I don't know, what is it always bad?
You said some really interesting things there, Josh, that I hope I don't forget and I come back and I come back to. So if you think of it later, remind me about success and failure and something I heard this week. But I wanna answer the actual question that you asked, which is there a good kind of pride? Is all pride bad? That's where I would say that words often carry multiple meanings. We see that with love. Like, I love tacos. I love my son. I love my daughter. I love my wife. Tacos and family, they can't be in the same realm. So, like, why would someone be using the same word to describe that emotion? And same thing happens with pride. And I've wondered this too myself. Is there a good kind of pride? And so that would be like, what if I said I'm proud of you, right? Versus I'm proud of me. Those two things hit differently. If I'm saying that I'm proud of you, I'm actually encouraging you and building you up, which my pride for you is not actually making me a prideful person, you know? I'm
Mm-hmm.
actually humbling myself, which is a remedy. It's an antidote to the deadly sin of pride. By the way, is humility. Encouraging other people is an antidote, a remedy. Right? You can only really encourage someone else out of a place of humility. So I'm not building up myself. I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to build up you. And then also, you mentioned being a father. I'm a father, and we want for our kids for them to have a sense of pride in themselves.
Right.
Like, and is that bad?
A sense of esteem.
Esteem, self-esteem. You want
Yeah.
it to be high. You want them to have confidence. And I'm not going to name this student, but there's a student he's in college now, and he's come through the youth program. And on one of my first few months working here as the youth director, I saw something in him that I thought was amazing. He was a seventh grader at the time, I think. Maybe, yeah, I think seventh grader. And this kid had a great deal of confidence and self-esteem, but he was not prideful. I watched him get into a tussle with his older brothers. He had two older brothers in the youth group, and they were like teasing him, bullying him, and treating him in a way that like could have wrecked this kid's night. Okay, but the way he navigated that and dealt with it was so smooth, and it led to it caught my eye, and I thought, wow, if I was him, I probably would have been so devastated and I would have been embarrassed, right? So like when you have a lot of pride, embarrassment is very easy for you. this kid wasn't embarrassed by how his older brothers were treating him. And just to give you the picture, they were like hitting on him. And now I sound like a terrible youth director. Like, you know, like, what happens in Mark's youth group? Yeah, he just lets kids punch each other. Well, they're brothers, and I knew that whenever this was happening. But he's like laying on the floor, and his big brother's like hitting him because of something that happened in a basketball game or something like that. But I watched him, and he was laughing. And then when he got up, he didn't carry any of that with him. And so this reminds me of C.S. Lewis's definition of humility, which is my favorite definition of humility. And it goes like this. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. It's not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. And I saw it in this kid. He didn't really think much of it. You know, he wasn't sitting there going, oh, what did people think? Did they think I was weak because I just got, taken down to the floor by my big brother? He wasn't even thinking of it. He's just laughing, and he gets up, and then we go on, and it doesn't wreck his night. So, and you'll forgive me, I'm probably ADD or whatever, but let's see, we're talking about his pride always bad. So I know that was a long little tangent there, but that story sticks out to me because he definitely had a great deal of confidence in himself, but it wasn't a sense of pride that could be taken from him, And then following that up, I never saw that kid bully anyone else. I don't think someone who doesn't have a problem with pride is going to bully other people. I think the bullies, the ones who are always looking at others and putting other people down, I think those are the ones that actually have the biggest problem with pride, not the ones who are humble. That makes sense?
Yeah,
And so I think you could be a humble person and have a great deal of self-esteem. Or you could be a prideful person and have a very low self-esteem. That makes sense?
Indeed. And I, unfortunately, would fall into the latter.
Oh.
Very unfortunately, but also just honestly, just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Well, we're all different, and we're all going to wrestle with things in a different way and to a different degree,
Right.
What's going to be tempting for you may not be tempting for the next person.
Something you just said, though, just to circle back, it remind you of something about success and failure.
Oh, yeah. So success and failure. So a lot of times pride is something that keeps us away from success, because you were talking about being a perfectionist, and I can relate to that. I'm a perfectionist too. It's hard for me to try new things unless in my head I feel like I have like a 99% chance of success.
Yeah.
I do not want to look stupid. I don't want people to realize, oh, he didn't think it all the way through. Look at that mistake, And I remember myself being a kid playing basketball in 3rd through 6th grade, playing like rec league ball. Oh, I could play so much better when I was just at home, like on my court in the backyard with all my friends, versus when I'm out there and there's a referee standing there blowing the whistle when I double dribbled or when I fouled. I hated the idea of making mistakes. And I do think that comes from a sense of pride. Like you, it's probably the top one of the 7 that I'm attracted to, that has its root in my life. Okay, so success, failure. I was not as good of a basketball player as I could have been because I was so afraid of failure and the embarrassment that comes with it, and how that was going to attack my bad sense of pride, right? So I didn't grow from it. And this past 2 weeks ago, I heard because I listen to podcasts, and I heard on this leadership podcast, it was Andy Stanley talking with John Maxwell, and one of them or both of them kind of landed on this gem of you can't excuse your way to success, but you can fail your way to success.
Excuse meaning opt out, not participate, not do the thing. Is that what you mean?
That or make excuses.
Make excuses.
Yeah. So a lot of times pride leads us to making excuses. For instance, I mean, this happens all the time, like in our families or in our close friendships or at work, where somebody comes up to us, talks to us about how, we've wronged them, we've hurt them, or something's disappointing them. And the natural instinct for most of us, especially if we've got, if pride is in our lives, is for us to make an excuse, you know, that, oh, that wasn't me, that was the way you saw it, or in any number of things, be like, oh, come on, that's unreasonable. So we want to make an excuse. And whenever we do that, we aren't growing. You can't excuse your way into growth. You have to acknowledge the failure to get into growth, to be able to get to the point of success. And if it's something like, trying a new thing, this podcast, or like, I think about it as we make some tweaks and changes to our contemporary service, The Gathering. You can make tweaks and changes, and then someone doesn't like them, or you realize, oh, that was a bad one. You just can't make excuses. Just acknowledge whenever a failure is a failure. And then if you just correct each failure as it comes, which is a very humble thing to do, by the way, whenever you do that, eventually you'll have made 100 corrections, But if you're caught up in excusing, right? Which again, if you're a perfectionist, you're going to either, how to put this, a perfectionist may not even get into the game of excusing or failing. They may just not even start, right? Because they don't want to fail. And I guess why I'm saying like the excuse and the failure to get to success, what a perfectionist like me or you probably needs to hear is the humble thing for us to do is to recognize the power of failure, because failure is embarrassing, but don't judge it based off of if there's a failure when I try the new thing, then the whole thing was a failure. Judge it for like, what's this going to look like in 3 months, 6 months, whenever we try a new thing, whenever we, and now take it back to personal living, Some people are afraid to call themselves a Christian because they think that they won't be perfect. They think that being a Christian means being perfect. And imagine like you come to faith at the age of 16 and you feel like, oh, if I'm going to call myself a Christian, I have to be blameless like Christ. And you've put that pressure on yourself to do that at the age of 16. Or like, I have to be there by 17. And it's like, no, we're United Methodist. We believe that there's the three graces, and you're always under God's grace. And the third grace is about sanctifying grace, which means like I have the rest of my life where God's going to work on me to root out every failure as it comes. So now you apply this, like you can fail your way to success. Apply that to a lifetime of being a Christian. And I think the desire to be perfect in our walk with Christ, I think the way to actually get to perfection in your walk with Christ is to be open to looking at all the failures and have the perfection isn't now and it's not tomorrow. It's like at the end of my life, or it's just on the other side of the end of my life. Does that make sense? I know I talked for a long time on that one.
No,
Went in a lot of directions.
No, it makes good sense. What do you think as talking about as it applies to our life and one's Christian walk? What did Jesus have to say about pride?
Oh, okay. So the scripture reading we were going to do for today was from Mark's Gospel, and I'm just going to do a very, very, very short version of this. Basically, you have two of Jesus's disciples, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who go to Jesus and they say, hey, grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. And this really angers the other 10 disciples that are with Jesus. And it's because that's a pretty prideful thing to say, to be like, hey, we're deserving of sitting at your right and your left. So, what is Jesus's answer whenever he sees human pride? And it goes like this in verse 42. So, this is Mark 10:42. So, Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles," that just means non Jews, "those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." So I think what Jesus is saying is that God never called any of us to be great. And when you got pride in your life, you're going to be thinking, oh, what can I do that's great? God called us to be good. God called us to serve the great one, you know? And I know I've wasted a lot of hours in my life by thinking about, should I be doing something greater than what I'm doing right now? And I have not spent nearly as many hours thinking, how can I best serve the one who really is great? You know? So our lives should not be about greatness. It should be about goodness and serving the one who is great. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That hits me in the mouth. Makes me feel real bad.
Well,
Because, I mean,
well, hopefully, when we hear Jesus's words and what he's getting at, yeah, it should hit in the mouth. But I always say that, like, conviction that comes from the Holy Spirit is always done in hope, and a sense of hopefulness. Like, when God really does take us aside and say, like, look, this is a correction that needs to be made. It's not something that we feel like can't be corrected. The despair comes in whenever we feel like God wants to correct something in our lives, but we can't correct it, and God's not going to help us correct it. And so then, again, that puts us in a position of fear, not of love. We're afraid of God, and then we're going to be like tempted to just not work on ourselves at all. Maybe look at how bad other people are around us and hope that they're so bad that we can get in, that somehow the bar gets lower. But yeah, great versus good. And then, it's all over this teaching of whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. So in the areas in my life where I'm thinking, man, I really want to be great, flip that around and be like, how can I be a servant? And I didn't plan on telling this story, but this is a true story in my life where, like, I've spent a long time trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do with my life. And attached to that question is this idea of greatness, Like, you're hearing Mark Reedy's arrogance right now. Like, I think I'm supposed to be really great. Somehow that was a message given to me when I was a very young child. It probably came from my grandparents, And part of that was is a really good gift that they gave me, But another part of that is really awful. I've mismanaged that gift by them, and I've hurt myself and I've hurt other people around me, in my arrogance, in my pride, the bad, problematic pride, right? So as I've had a lot of anxiety about what am I supposed to do? Is this enough? And at times I've actually thought about leaving the ministry years ago and starting my own business because I'm like, I'm smart. I could do this. And just thinking about what could I do that would be really great. And then watching all these videos about other people who I think are great. How can I emulate what they're doing? And one day, the chains came off because I realized that I've learned a lot about, things like starting a business or leadership and things like that. And I just thought, what if instead of me trying to do it, what if one day whenever one of my kids comes along and is like, "Hey, I want to start this business." What if I just served them?
Mm.
What if I just helped them do it? You know? It took so much pressure off for me in my own life that I realized, like, I don't have to do the great thing. I can help somebody else do the great thing. And that brought with it a measure of peace, you know? And it also brought with it a measure of, like, well, all the things that I've read, all the things that I've studied, listened to, all the hours invested into XYZ, it doesn't have to be wasted whenever I can look at it in a way of, like, I'm going to serve someone else with this education that I've gotten. That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes enormous sense. And like I said, it hits me in the mouth because my professional life has largely been a comedy of errors, largely. And there are times like I wish I was exaggerating, I wish I was overstating it, but it's like sleepless nights and enormous pressure that is, in all candor, it's all put on myself. I do it, right? And that's part of what I think about sometimes. Like, is this all your pride? Is this thing of, to your point, is this me thinking I'm supposed to be great, and it's just not so, or it's just, but in particular, the word about, well, if you do want to be great, suppose you do want to actually be great, where can you just look to serve? And that's real.
And it's a release. It's like I said, it takes the chains off.
Yeah.
Like when we go to Jesus and we realize, like, this burden of feeling like I'm supposed to be great, he never put that on me. I put that on me, or the world put that on me, or the devil put that on me. Jesus didn't put that on me. And
That's an incredible word.
yeah, well, it's
And
the gospel. It's the good news.
And perhaps then that would be the best place to wrap this
Yeah.
and say maybe the most peace you'll find is letting go of pride.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
The most peaceful thing you got going for you is to let go of this thing that is also very deadly.
Yeah. And when we recognize that we've got pride, the best way to, and the problematic pride, the best way that we can root that out, and that's one of the 7 deadly roots of sin. The best way we can pull that root out is to look outward. How can I serve people around me with what I have? And to look outward as, how can I encourage someone else in the way that I wish for myself? How can I love my neighbor as myself? How can I look at this person over here and build them up in the way that I've spent so many hours trying to build myself up? So turn outward. Do that with God, and that root of pride can't survive very long in that soil.
It's a good word.
Yeah. Well, next week we're going to do envy in person in the gathering. But hopefully this has been a blessing to us, and to anyone who's listening, all however many that is. We'll see. Please let us know if you listen to this and if it was meaningful to you.
Indeed. Take care, friends. Have a good one.